The game loop is what defines every game. What I've found is there's actually 3 nested loops, each one feeding into the next. These loops build upon each other in a foundational way. Get them right, and you're one step closer to having a hit game. Let's now look at each loop in detail, starting with the micro loop. The micro loop is your minute-to-minute gameplay. So for example, let's say that you are playing an adventure game and you are a character like Link. So your core mechanics are going to be traversal, and it's going to be yielding some sort of a weapon. But that's not necessarily a loop. A loop needs to have a beginning, middle, and end. If it's combat, what is the beginning, middle, and end of a combat loop? Well, you're going to need to break it down into the smaller parts. You have traversal, you have your character, and then you have the enemy character. You're also going to need to have the approach. What happens when you get close to the enemy? How does the enemy respond? How do you respond? Do you have a ranged weapon, or you need to go all the way to toe-to-toe combat? Then you have the actual exchange of blows. What is happening there? You're attacking, it's attacking, you're both giving and receiving damage. This is the middle of the combat, the middle of the loop. Then you have the end of the loop. Either you've lost all your hit points and your character dies, or it's lost all its hit points and it dies, therefore finishing the loop. So loop 2, I call the level loop. Now I know not every genre has levels. For example, open world crafting games are more obviously open world. They don't have specific level loads going from section to section. But I don't think that matters. When I think of a level, I think of what is 20 to 45 minutes of gameplay. What is a chapter or a chunk of your gameplay that you could sort of extract out of your experience and focus on as a designer? It is testing your micro loop in various ways to get as much usage out of them to make it interesting. And now you have a level, you have a stretch of terrain that he has to traverse. Let's focus on the theme and variations that the level should be pushing and pulling on your micro loop. What you want to do is you want to have enemies and situations that tests the core loop, test the traversal, test the combat in all different kinds of ways. If you're finding your level is boring, either your level doesn't have enough tests against your micro loop, or your micro loop doesn't have enough actions or verbs or strategy within it to make it interesting. So then what you could do is you just go back and forth between these 2 loops. You put different kinds of obstacles or tests within your level that test your micro loop, or you go back to your micro loop and you add more actions, you add more verbs, you add more strategy, stats, something like this, so that when you go back to your level loop, you now have a little bit more room to explore and have some more variety. The final loop, and the loop that's the most difficult to sort of design because you can't really feel it until the end of your project, is the macro loop. Now the macro loop is the feeling of all the level loops in a row. What is it like when you experience your project from level to level to level, and then you start to just feel the overall macro of it? And you're not going to really feel it until the very end. So a lot of this is just going to come from your design documentation and having that sort of North Star of where you're going with your project. You're just going to have to sort of trust in yourself and trust that you know where you're going with it. And about halfway through your project and towards the end, you're going to start to feel that your macro is happening. At this macro level, you're also thinking about the overall story, the beginning, middle, and end of the entire story. Ultimately, the player wants to understand your game loops, but also wants to get lost in them. When they approach your project, they're going to analyze your presentation, your mechanics, your game loops to what they already know. But really, the player just wants to get lost in your game, to get immersed in it. When your game loops all come together in a harmonious way, The player just gets it. And when they get it, everything just clicks.